So here we are, we're gonna work on this Mazda Familia Generation 2 with the BPT engine. I'm gonna rewire the full EFI system. So here it is. I will be rewiring the full EFI system of this BPT. And I'll check each part for any questionable. Ang pangit na pagkakatira. No? So when I first saw this engine, I saw this charge pipe here was of a smaller diameter than what the factory designed it. So I asked the new owner to change this one of a proper diameter, and now it's already fixed. I think the charge pipe before was around only 2 inches, and now this is 2.5 inches. So the hose here is of a proper length, but the breather hose, which is this one, it's too long, so we will shorten this after the wiring. This is the breather hose or the valve cover towards the intake pipe here. So yeah, disconnect mo to, LG. So there, it's now disconnected. Socket for the vane airflow. Let's see the layout. Saan naka-branch yan? Tama lang. Sige, remove mo na tong buong intake assembly na yan. Disconnect mo dito sa hose na to. So we'll disconnect it here at the stainless intake pipe and not here at the boost controller, because we might break the pipe here at the boost controller. So the issue with this car is that it hesitates at around 5,000 to 6,000 RPM when you go full throttle, and only in second gear up to fourth gear. Pero sa first gear wala, di ba?
Oo.
We've done all the OBD diagnostics troubleshooting. So we've already done the troubleshooting for each individual sensors and output devices. And still there's a problem. But when we try to reinforce the ground of the EFI system, the hesitation goes out. So we believe that the EFI system is the problem of this engine. First thing I noticed here also is that the igniter is not here near the ignition coil when the factory installed the igniter here beside the ignition coil only, because the purpose of the igniter is to switch the ignition coil. So the switching should be done near the ignition coil to provide high power, and not inside the car near the ECU. And also the knock control module, the factory designed it also here as much as possible near the knock sensor, but the knock sensor was also placed inside. The knock sensor amplifier amplifies the signal of the knock sensor before it goes to the ECU as an input signal. Patingin yung charge pipe. As you will see, the welds here, it's so big. Unlike our welds are thinner. Still, it's strong. So we're now going to remove the VAF sensor. Also here, the ignition coil high tension wire. There you go. Now you'll see here that the boost control solenoid, the wiring harness is so long, and also the socket for the VAF sensor. I think the socket for the VAF sensor is just right, but I think I will make a better layout for this. Disconnect mo tong, putulin mo na tong strap. Okay, let's disconnect this strap here. Putulin mo na yan. So let's check. This is the socket. Hindi lang man sinanga dito. So this is the socket for the boost controller. Pinasok dito. Shit. Ang laking trabaho nito.
Mukhang doon dumaan. Hindi siya dito dumaan.
Hindi niya ginawang modular. Shit. Magtatanggal ba tayo ng fender nito? Tapos dito sinangatong masyadong major na to. So let's disconnect this ignition coil socket. Tinggal na nga hindi. Tanggalin mo tong strap na ignition coil. Ignition coil socket. Remove this strap. And this one is for the disconnect. Tanggalin mo to. Remove the reservoir. Sige, alisin mo. Ibaba mo lang yan. Sige, disconnect mo yung socket na yan. Ang biniyak nila to, tapos hindi lang mantinip, no? This wire branch is for the EFI system. Ano to? Ground. Yeah, disconnect mo yung ground doon. So, we've removed the ground.
Tinago po ata may yung
Ha? Yung wire?
mukhang tinago.
Yung
Hindi ginaya yung stock eh.
Tangina, pinasok talaga dito eh. So this the original EFI wiring harness should not go here through the fender side, but should route here at the back of the engine. Meron ba diyang grommet? Tingnan mo. Meron. Pinaikot nila. Shit. Ang laking trabaho nito. Ito, ano to?
Battery, wala naman lang likod po.
Wait. Shit. So the problem here is that the first one who wired the EFI system, he did not follow what the factory did to the EFI system. That it is modular, it is removable, it can easily be serviced. You can easily remove the EFI wiring harness from the engine bay through the harness grommet at the firewall, but the a part of the EFI system, which is this one, and it went through here at the harness grommet for the car here under this fender. So in order to remove that wiring harness, we need to remove this fender. So it's very laborious to rework this wiring harness. So we'll remove this charge pipe first so that it will not interfere with my work. Dito lang. Remove here na para mas maluwag. Tapos dito ka na mag-remove din. Ano yung strap nila dito? Ba't nakaganito ba't may strap yung blow-off valve? Nangin ako to, dito ko diniretso eh. Kaya nga, bakal din naman to. For me, I don't like the installation of the blow-off valve. Considering the flange of the blow-off valve is already made of steel, I can weld it directly here at the stainless charge pipe. Less clatter, more cleaner installation. I can weld this flange directly here with good welds. Dumiting nan pag ganito eh. You'll see the welds here. It's a different shop who did this the welds here, this charge pipe. Since this is a revision from what I told the owner previously, it was made of a 2-inch charge pipe only. I told the owner Alan to make the charge pipe the same as the original charge pipe from the factory, which is around 2.5 inch.
Sa aircon.
Inasetilin?
Oo.
No? Ang pangit pa ng pagkabutas, no?
Hindi na pinantay.
So that's the hose for the boost reference for the waste deep. Kung dito niya pinadaan to, lalong ang layo ng coil. Diba?
Oo.
Ang layo ng biyahe ng coil. Since the igniter is inside the car near the ECU, this is a very long travel path for the switching of the ignition coil by the igniter. So now here we've exposed the wiring harness for the engine side. You'll see here that the thermo switch doesn't have the OEM socket. As you can see here, it can easily be removed. Unlike if there's an original socket, you need to push a tab first, the lock, to pull out the socket. Here it's just a terminal, and here is the socket for the oxygen sensor. This is for the engine ground. May engine ground naman siya. And here's the socket for the CAS. Oops, it's brittle already, so as you can see, it cracked. There you go. And here is the fuel pressure regulator solenoid. Disconnect mo tong socket ng oxygen sensor. Ha? Yun din papunta?
Dito ako pupunta.
Shit. Yung oxygen sensor?
Hindi, itong isang wire.
Ah,
Dito ako pupunta.
hindi niya pinadaan sa
Liquid black.
original.
Liquid black.
Shit. Ang laking trabaho nito.
Kinat pa rin.
Hindi niya alam na mayroon dun sa loob. So here's the original wire for the radiator fan. It's cut here. Injector harness. There you go. Knock sensor. Nawala isang engine ground niya.
Nandito pala yung ground doon.
Pero meron dito isang ground eh. Ah, ito. So the thermo switch is separate from the EFI wiring harness. Considering the original wiring harness for the BPT, it's integrated with the EFI wiring harness. Disconnect the TPS and the idle air control bulb sockets. So here's the wire for the thermo switch. The one who wired it separated it from the EFI wiring harness. And this one is the reverse switch using a non-original socket. But there's also a non-original, there's no socket here. There's no socket here for the reverse switch, just terminals with electrical tape in each terminal. This part of the harness goes to the firewall. That's the original version of the BPT, but this one, it went through here to the fender side. Under this fender, there's a wiring harness grommet there for this main wiring harness of the car. Problema pa nito, pag ito sinanga, binalot kasama dun sa iba. Diba?
Magagawin sa loob.
Pero ito na talaga yan.
Okay.
Pasok muna ako sa loob. Tsaka tayo humingi ng approval. So here at the wiring harness firewall side, there's an original hole for a wiring harness grommet. It passes through here, part of the EFI wiring system. So this is the wiring harness for the EFI system. It went through the hole here at the firewall. That's the original design, so that the EFI system harness is modular. You can remove it from the rest of the wiring harness of the car. Unlike the other part of the wiring harness, it went through that fender. So now let's go inside the car and check the inside. So here's the ECU side of the wiring harness. As you will see here, there are lots of clutter and unconnected wires. So shit, grabe.
Hindi lang sa mag-umpisa.
Okay. Ito yung ECU ground na nilagay dun, no? So this is also wrong. Saan yung nilagay mo dito? Sige, disconnect mo. Itong room light sinama pa, hiniwalay pa. Room room power, 12 volts power. Disconnect mo nga ito, disconnect mo. So you'll see the wiring harness here. Oh, ba't may isa pa dito? Ano to? Ang daming ground, nakaiwalay. Grabe. Grabe naman yan. Shit. Ito. Ano to? Switch para saan? Wala lang. So there's a switch here. Sa center console yan. Saan nakakabit? Let's check. Naka-ground sa?
Dito po. Naka-ground yan.
So binibigyan niya ng ground yung... Let's check. Kung gusto i-on yung fan. Force on. Ito. Puputulin mo na lang ito mamaya. Pero nasa room to Tingnan mo saan pumunta yan. Room fuse yan Bunutin mo na nga itong ECU. What's this? Wastegate solenoid valve. Nakahiwalay Wastegate solenoid valve. Nakahiwalay sa main na sanga. Tapos tap dito, tap doon. Wala na. Nasaan na igniter nito? So see here. Here's the igniter. There's no fuse. There's no heatsink. There's even no heatsink for the igniter. Remember that the igniter is just like a transistor, a power transistor that switches the ignition coil. Since the travel path for the switching is too far from the ignition coil. And here's the knock control module. What's this? Gulo ng wiring.
Malapit na po ba masunog?
Ha?
Malapit na po ba masunog?
Ay, pag napanood doon nung nag-wiring yung Marvin, asartalo siguro sa atin. Paano kung nagsasabi lang naman tayo na totoo? Putang ina, wiring yun. Sakit sa ulo maganda pa yung original, hindi binago Meron pa siya dito, nasakit Tingin ko sa original na ano to eh. Condenser. Yung condenser, ang layo din sa coil. Considering the condenser should absorb the noise created by the ignition coil. That's the purpose of the condenser. If it's too far from the ignition coil, the source of the noise, then hindi rin siya effective na nandito siya. Same with the igniter. Too long travel path for switching. The reason of the one who wired this is that to prevent heat soak, since he said that these components are all ready. But considering that since year 2000 that I have started working with the Mazda cars and EFI wiring systems, I've installed a lot of BPT engines from Japan, and I have not encountered any problem from my wiring harness. Even if these two are in the engine bay, I have not experienced any failure from it. So there's no point, and it defeats the purpose of these modules. That's what I've told you a while ago, that like the igniter, it should be near the ignition coil. Like the igniter of the ignition coil, what I've told you a while ago, that its purpose is to switch the ignition coil on and off depending on the command of the ECU. Ito yung boost controller. Sigurado to kaya nakahiwalay. Huli niya na nalaman na kailangan. Diba? Let's check. And there you go. Ito, ano to eh? Condenser. Hindi ko alam kung saan nilagay. Ayun yung mga sockets na link. What's the problem? So what you'll learn here is that even though you can wire and run the engine, it doesn't mean it will perform according to its proper operation. Ayan, relay. That's the condenser. Nandito rin sa loob. So wait. Stop na muna tayo dyan. Wait tayo approval.